Dr. Andrew Grecki here. The objection I hear most from practice owners isn't about billing. It's not about compliance. It's not about technology. It's my staff will never go for this when we're talking about RTM. And I always ask, have you talked to your staff about it? Right? The answer is almost always no. And so what's happening, I think, is the practice owner or the clinical director or the manager, they're predicting their staff's reaction based on past experiences with new initiatives. And I get it. I'm a practice owner myself, and we've had a lot of new initiatives over the past 16 years. And these are experiences that, fair enough, they probably did not go as well as you wanted them to go, right? But I really believe RTM is different, and it has been for me as well. And so the reason it's different is actually kind of interesting. So I really want to try to explain that to you so you can really learn from what I've gone through and what others have gone through. If you've ever rolled out a new EMR, right, a new documentation system, a new outcome measure protocol, right, maybe like photo or whatever, you know what it's like when your staff is not on board, okay? And you have a meeting and their eyes are rolling in the meeting, right? There's the workarounds, we tried it and it didn't really work. Conversations maybe 2 months later, right? That these are what you hear. And that experience is real, and it's earned, right? Practice owners who've been burned by failed initiatives, I don't want to go through that again. I've done that. I've done it with group classes, personal training, dry needling, red light laser, and then that they project that experience onto RTM, right? And the fear is I'm going to ask my team to do one more thing, one more work thing. They're going to resent it. And 6 months from now, this is going to be another thing that fizzled out. And, that fear, I think, makes complete sense because our current beliefs are based on our past experiences. And it's not just it's not what happens with RTM. That's not my experience. And that's not the experiences that we're having with other clinics that we're working with across the country. But you have to do it the right way, and you have to have the right mindset and the right strategy. So here's what I've learned talking to clinical staff at practices that have added RTM. Your physical therapists went into this profession because they want to help patients get better, right? And that's still true even when they're burned out and even when they're frustrated with reimbursements and maybe they're short-staffed and they're exhausted, right? I get that. The thing that they're most frustrated about, more than documentation, more than the insurance calls or the authorizations, is when they do great clinical work and patients don't follow through or do what they ask them to do at home. You might do a fantastic session, but you build a plan, you teach the exercises, and then the patient doesn't do them. They don't progress, and eventually they drop out. Maybe they go and have procedures, injections, surgeries, right? And that's demoralizing as a provider because the clinical side was solid, right? The breakdown wasn't in what happened, but the breakdown was what happened between visits, not what you did as a provider. And RTM really solves that problem. And when you explain that to your PTs, that this isn't more admin work for them, it's a tool that helps their patients actually follow through, the reaction shifts completely. And it helps them follow through because there's accountability built into your home exercise program, right? And so let me tell you what happens when practices introduce RTM to their staff the right way. Not, here's a new billing thing we're adding to increase revenue because of declining, but here's a way for your patients to get more support between visits. Without more work for you, I think that's the key. You're already doing the home programs. That's all we want you to do. Because in our model at MovementRX, we have remote PTAs and CODAs that handle the monitoring. So your clinical staff isn't fielding notifications. They're not having to call patients. They're not answering app messages after hours. They're not monitoring. They're not even documenting. There's no documentation requirements because our system does it all for you, right? What they see on their end is their patients are more engaged. Their patients are coming in, having actually done their exercises. Progress is faster. Outcomes are better, right? Progress is faster. Outcomes are better. That makes the provider happy and more rewarded, right? One of the practices we work with had a PT was initially the most skeptical person in the clinic about RTM. She thought it would be one more thing to manage. And 3 months in, she actually told the practice owner, I actually look forward to seeing my RTM patients. They're more engaged. They're progressing better. It makes my job better, right? That's the key. This is not an unusual story, but again, I do hear the flip side of that where people have a mindset that they're not into this. They don't want to do something new. They're rebelling. They're not committed. If you're planning to add RTM, here's how I'd suggest introducing this to your staff. First, you really have to frame it around patient outcomes, not billing, not reimbursement. We found a way to support our patients between visits so they actually follow through on their exercises and their plan of care. They're going to show up to their visits more. They're going to be a more compliant, better compliance, better outcomes, fewer patients dropping out. We see all that in the data. The second thing I would try to highlight is you need to be specific about what it doesn't require from them. They're not monitoring the app. They're not fielding messages. They're not making the phone calls that are required once a month to the patient. They're not doing extra documentation on top of their current load. Their job is to keep doing what they're already doing, right? That's important. Tell them what they're not doing. Third, I would say let them see it work, right? Pick a handful of patients for the first few weeks. Let the clinical team watch those patients, right? Watch them come back more engaged. Watch them show up to their visits more. Watch them be more compliant. Watch them be more motivated. That early evidence, I think it does more than any staff meeting or training or motivational speech could ever do. Then I would also try to include them in the feedback loop, right? What's working? What would they change? I think the PTs who feel ownership over the program are the ones who champion it. And you need that initially. Staff resistance to RTM, it usually evaporates within the first few weeks or month. And it's because the evidence of what it does for the patient is right there. It's right there in the room, right? You're seeing it every day. It's also why we don't ask that. This is something that becomes part of your normal plan of care. If you've been holding off on RTM because you're worried about staff buy-in, I'd highly encourage you to actually have the conversation with your team before you write it off. Don't write the idea off, right? You might be surprised. I think you will be surprised if you come at this the right way. And if you want to talk through how to introduce it, what to say, how to frame it, how we've seen other practices handle the rollout or the objections or the self-limiting beliefs, that's exactly the kind of thing that we talk about on strategy calls. And if you would like to schedule one of those, it's free. The link's right below this video. I'm Dr. Andrew Grecki. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed making it. I'll see you next time.